Hi everyone, my name's Katie. Welcome back to My Parenting Way. Today my video is a quick fire video on all the childcare options that you might need when you go back to work here in the UK. So number one is childminders. Now, a childminder is someone who looks after your child but in their own home. They look after multiple children of all different ranges. They have to have a specialised child to adult ratio depending on the child's age, which they need to abide to. Now, all childminders here in the UK need to be Ofsted registered, which means they get rated and checked the same way that schools do here in the UK, and therefore they get a rating ranging from outstanding to inadequate. And if you want any of that information with a prospective childminder, you always have to ask a question and they should be able to provide you with that information. So you can find childminders on Google. You can also go on your local council government website, who can also provide you with a list of childminders in the area. And there are also apps or specialised websites such as childcare.co.uk, which have a list of childminders in your area, and they have star ratings and you can contact them. They do tend to charge a little bit for this, but it's a really easy way of finding out and contacting some in your area. So some childminders include the cost of meals within their hourly rate, but some may ask you to bring a packed lunch for your child during the day, but these are all sorts of things you should ask when meeting for a childminder for the first time. So what are the pros of a childminder? So they can tend to be flexible, more flexible than say a nursery, where you can probably negotiate early starts and late finishes a lot more easily depending on the childminder in question, and you could probably negotiate an hourly rate depending on this. They do tend to be cheaper than a nursery because the overheads are a lot lower, because obviously the person is looking after a child in their own home. So this tends to be a bit more flexible around them, and they do tend to be a lot cheaper for this. Because you're going into someone's own home, usually it's quite kitted out and ready for children because that's their job, and it's a nice homely environment. I find that with a childminder, you're going into almost a replica of your own home, hopefully, and that can be quite warm and welcoming and easy for a child to transition into this environment when you go back to work. The mixed ages can be a real bonus, especially for your child's learning and development. Childminders do tend to leave the house quite a lot, and that gives them more flexibility. So they'll go to a local park, they'll go to a local community farm. And I do find with childminders, as long as you get a good one, there tends to be this more caring, motherly element to it. It is more sort of one-to-one. It's not like a big classroom or nursery environment where there's lots of kids and it's all a bit chaotic. So now on to the cons with having a childminder. So the really obvious one is that you are depending on one person to look after your child, which means that if they take any holiday or any sick leave or any kind of time off to do something else, like I had one that needed to go to a funeral and they need that time off, it can leave you in the lurch when it comes to childcare, and that can potentially then become really stressful and costly if you then have to pay for another person to look after your child. As I previously mentioned, some childminders request you to bring packed lunch or your own food with you when your child goes to stay with them for the day. It's an extra thing you have to think about in the morning as you're trying to get ready for work and trying to get your child ready. So as I mentioned in the pros, childminders can have mixed ages, but this can also be a con, because it means that your child might be in a situation where they're the youngest, or they don't have really any children their age that they can really bond with and play with, and it would sometimes be nice for them to be in an environment in their own age, and that can sometimes put people off. So a nursery is a specialised building or environment which can have several rooms all broken down to different age groups, and you bring your child there, you drop them off. They usually get fed, although they have the option of packed lunch if you want them. The child does tend to stay in that room, and they usually have a little garden that they go out during the day. All nurseries have to be Ofsted registered, the same as schools and childminders. Most nurseries take babies as young as 3 months old, and they tend to split them up into rooms, as I already mentioned. So a lot of nurseries now have preschools attached to them, and they'll start to have more structured activities that will start getting them ready for school. So the pros of having a nursery. So the first one is a pretty obvious one, is that because there are several staff always in the rooms, the likelihood of you being able to just literally drop your child off and go, and you're almost guaranteed every time that someone will be there to pick up your child and look after your child for the day, means that there's a lot less stress. Compare that to, say, a childminder where there's only the one person looking after your child. So if there is any kind of last minute sickness or change, it can add extra stress. With a nursery, you don't get that. So most nurseries, as I already mentioned, offer meals as well as part of their sort of price package. Another pro is that the staff tend to be trained specifically about the age that they work in. So for example, Aidan is at a nursery. He was in the baby room for a long time, and his key worker is someone who sort of manages the room, had specialised in babies specifically, and had done extra training and, knew different activities to stimulate a baby's brain. And she was just very switched on when it comes to just babies, which is great when it comes to when you drop your child off and you know someone's there who's really focused on your baby's care. And another good pro is that because it's a situation where your child is in a room with lots of children, all sort of learning how to share and how to be focused throughout the day on certain activities. I found that with Emily, who's now at school, being in a nursery environment really helped her being prepped for school, and that she went to school without any issues. And I think it's because she was already sort of prepped for the day and almost the routine. So some of the cons are that nurseries are expensive. They tend to be a lot more expensive than a childminder. And also you're bound by their opening times. So a lot of them run from around 7:30 to 8 in the morning, and they will probably run until about 6. Unfortunately, if you then have work that sits outside these hours, it can get really complicated, whereas a childminder might be able to be flexible around these hours a little bit more. So it's just something to bear in mind if you're going down the nursery route. And finally, a big con for me was that your child was in the same place, in the same room all day, every day. But it's not like a childminder where they have the flexibility of going out for the day. So again, it's something that, depending on how many days your child is in nursery, it's something to consider. So nannies are different from childminders in the sense that they come to your house and they look after your child or children completely on a separate, you get them all to yourself scenario. So you can actually share nannies with friends if you've got friends who live nearby, and I do have friends who actually share nannies. So the nanny will come to one of the friend's house and they'll bring the child there, and they'll look after both children. So they can either stay in your home where they live with you, and that tends to be a little bit cheaper because nannies who live in the families' houses don't have any overheads, so they don't have a mortgage to pay, they don't have bills to pay, etc., because they're living in your house, so they do tend to be a bit cheaper. So the pros of having a nanny is that it is gold standard care. Usually nannies have to go through some kind of training to be able to class themselves as a nanny, and it's very bespoke to your child, and they will literally do anything that you want within reason with your child, and they'll get them out and they'll do really focused games, and it is a luxury to have a nanny. And if your child is on a slightly nervous nature, or if you are personally nervous about leaving your child with anyone with childcare because you have to go back to work, then having a nanny is in your own home is that really comfortable feel where you're not bringing them out anywhere. It's in your own home environment. It's with someone you trust. The cons are similar to the ones of a childminder in the sense that you're relying on one person, and these in comparison to childminders where they charge on an hourly basis, nannies tend to be sort of salaried, almost like in a pro rata scenario. So you, under that kind of contract, you do have to give them so much holiday and so much sick pay. It's something to bear in mind if you're going to employ a nanny, is that you're going to have to then arrange alternative childcare if they do decide to go on holiday or if they do have a day off sick. So if you are also only having a nanny for a couple of days per week, because say you're only going back to 2 days a week at work, I have personally found it quite difficult to find a nanny who will only do really short stints, because if you think about it, they're in your home, they want to be able to have enough money to be able to live, and especially ones who then have their own home outside, they need to make sure that their salaried money is enough coming in to let them live. And obviously the biggest con is that they are very expensive. So there are different ways around this, and there are some nannying companies who, if you had like a trainee nanny, then they tend to be cheaper. Obviously, I've already mentioned if a nanny comes and stays with you, but that does mean you have to have the room to accommodate a nanny. So it's loads of things to consider with nanny, but it is the best. So my last one is friends and family. Now this can be a bit of a complicated one, but a lot of people use their friends and family to help look after their children. It's probably the first thing that you'd go to if you're going back to work and you were lucky enough to have family nearby. I've got friends who actually they actually share the childcare. So when the one person's not at work and she's at home with hers, the friend drops her child, and the one that stays at home looks after the both of them, and then they swap. And that's how they arrange their childcare, which I think is great that you have that option. So some of the pros include, it's usually cheap or free. So if you've got grandparents who look after your child, bonus. Also, the personal care that your child gets is going to be perfect. It's going to be, you know, top notch, because your parents or their grandparents has an interest, a personal interest in your child. Obviously, as well, is that with family they have the same kind of flexibility in the sense that hours can be negotiated. So your parents or your child's grandparents might be able to keep them for a little bit later, or you can drop them off earlier to work around your hours, and that can be a huge bonus. Some of the cons, obviously the same as a nanny or childminder, is that you are relying on the one person. So if they are sick or if they go away for a week, you have to arrange something else, which can be just annoying. An obvious con, which is something that I've seen quite a lot happen with friends who rely on family, is that it can create a very complex relationship with families and friends when you share childcare. I've seen it where friends have fallen out quite heavily with family members because they haven't agreed with their childcare techniques. That can be something that can be difficult to negotiate around, especially if the grandparents or other friends are actually looking after your child for free. It can become complicated. And then another obvious con is that you actually have to live near your family or friends, close enough for them to be able to supply the childcare easily. And not many of us are lucky enough to be in that position, unfortunately, to be able to just drop them off in the morning and then whiz to work. Again, it's another complication that if you don't live near family, well, there's not much you can really do. So I hope you found that useful. Those are some of the childcare options that you can have, with some pros and cons here in the UK. I would really love to hear from you what you do for your childcare if you go back to work. Please mention in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video, and we will see you next time.